Today I thought I'd share a project I'm working on, a Captain Marvel body paint, and to kind of stretch my skills I decided to create a prop from scratch. So I made this medallion which Captain Marvel wears on her red sash if they follow the comic books, and I wanted to make this using a 3D printer, so I modeled this in a 3D package and then I exported it to my 3D printer and then created something from nothing. I just love the idea of being able to make something that goes from your mind into a physical object. And here we go. So I printed it and it turned out flawlessly. So this is from my Anycubic Photon stereolithography printer. And so this is the process of me making a mold of this. So this is OOMOO 30 from Smooth On, and I love this product as a silicone base for creating molds. So basically what we're going to do is pour this over the top of the model and create a place where we can make copies. Now this is a 30 durometer, that's the number on there, that's the softness. It's very soft, almost like jello, maybe a little harder than jello. So I'm recording this after the fact, obviously, and watching myself create this. So I basically took the lid of a cup and cut it off, and I'm going to create a dam basically where we're going to pour the silicone in over the top of the model. So I'm just cutting a piece of foam core here to use as the base, and you don't have to do this fancy, but you know, why not use a straight edge if you got one laying around, and then of course ignore it and go ahead and cut it again anyway because it didn't go all the way through. So what I want to do is I need to glue that object to the foam core. Otherwise it's going to float, and we have a problem in that it is hollow on the inside because I didn't want to waste the resin. So I'm using plastina here, gluten-free and sulfur-free, which is a more important part of this clay. And I'm going to just rip a piece of this off and get it all softened up. The goal here is we're going to push this in underneath the model to fill that void. So we're going to actually glue the silicone, or we're going to glue the clay to the foam core. So we're not going to try and get glue on the outside of the model. I don't want little beads interrupting this. Now it is going to lift the model a bit off the foam core, which means that we're going to get some silicone that's going to seep underneath, meaning it's going to create like a little flap. We're going to need to cut that off later. The nice thing about this is, thinking ahead, I don't need this model to be that thick, so when we pour in our final resin, we don't have to go the entire depth of this. And I'll show that as when we get to that point here. So basically I'm just kneading up this clay and trying to get it warm so that it's malleable enough to push in underneath that model. This took me a while. So once it's good, we want to push that in there. The model's about 1 millimeter thick around the perimeter, and I want to make sure that I don't crack that as I'm shoving this in here. Because it is rather delicate. It is fully cured resin, meaning I set it out in the sun for a while because it is a UV based resin, and let that kind of harden up a bit, but it still does not have any durability to it. And the reason I want to make molds of this is that if I decide to make additional versions of this, which I'm going to, then I don't have to try and print them. And I did have a couple prints fail, and when you have prints fail, obviously that costs you time and money, and you end up with nothing to show for it. So I get this pretty much filled in. I decided I need a little bit more clay here, so I go back to the ball to grab a little bit more to make sure that I have enough there. Now this process is one you could do any way you'd want to do. Maybe, you know, looking back on it, I should have created a little bit more of a dam around the edge so that the silicone didn't leak all the way in under the model. But you know, every time you do this, and you learn something. And this is the first time I've had to use clay as a backfill for an object, so this was kind of neat to learn, a good process for me. So here I'm just giving you a close-up of the clay being pushed in underneath everything. And then I need to hot glue that basically in place. And I push it down on the mat just to make sure that it's good and tight and things look good. And I'm happy with that. And so I'm just going to glue that down. Really don't show that process here very well. Gluing down something with the hot glue gun is less than thrilling. So once that's glued down, then I need to do the same thing with the lid and just glue that in place. Now I am using a pretty good amount of silicone here, meaning I probably didn't have to fill this up as far as I did, and I didn't have to make it as wide as I did. That probably would have been a bit smarter to not use as much product. but it also makes the mold more durable. So in the long run, I'll have the ability to make a lot more molds from this, or more casts from this mold. By the way, I'm thinking about giving one of these away. So if you like this video and you made it this far in my rambling, and you leave a comment below, I'm probably going to give away one of these. I will give away an unpainted one, so you can do anything you want to do with it. My goal here is to make one that looks like it is worn metal. So we're going to spray paint it and look for a little bit of texture, and then I'm going to wear it with a little bit of a black wash. So there's a little bit more process to this than just simply making the duplicate here, but this is the part that I thought was kind of interesting. Again, we've created this from something that was in my head. You know, I just made it up. I think that's pretty cool. All right, so once that's on there and we make sure there are no leaks, meaning that the silicone cannot leak in underneath, and I find this area that might be suspect, and you know, hot glue is cheap. I just make sure that it's good, because if we get a hole and the silicone leaks in underneath, it's going to drain out of the mold, and then I've made a mistake, and it's going to cost me some money and some products. So basically, see, I pushed that all the way around the outside there. I didn't center my object real well. I probably could have thought more about that, but I was kind of in a hurry, and I wanted to get this done, and I decided to videotape it at the last second. So this is kind of bad on my part. But again, you can see the mistakes that I am making and learn from them. All right, so put your gloves on if you're handling any of this kind of stuff. Even though this stuff is probably relatively safe, they still want to be protected. I mean, you don't want to get a lot of this stuff in your hands, and it's just best to always assume the worst. So there are two parts. This is a part A and a part B, and we have to stir this because if we introduce too many air bubbles, we're going to end up with a situation, and air is your enemy here. Unless you have a degassing unit or a vacuum unit where you want to pull the air out of this, and most of us don't have that hanging around, then that's a process we want to try and avoid. So you do need to stir the product, not shake it, and get it stirred up without introducing too much air into it. And they're pretty thick, so this does take a little bit of effort without wrecking anything, and I wanted to move that out of the way just to make sure that I had the camera here. This is some really amazingly poor camera work, and I apologize for that, but I tried to capture it as best I could. But you know, a lot of this time I'm standing in front of the camera or doing something ridiculous, but hey, that's why we do this, right? So we can learn. So here's me stirring for an inordinately long time. Again, trying not to get too much air in it. And then we're going to use containers for this. And you want to make sure that obviously you don't use the same stir stick for both containers, the part A and the part B. Now we can take as much time as we need to right now to get everything mixed. Now note, we do need to use equal parts of A and B. So I am not just filling this mold. I have another mold that's off camera for another project I'm working on. So I'm going to do what looks like a lot of silicone here, but just note that I am working on more than one thing at a time. And when you do this, you typically want to save them up and knock them all out at once, just because stirring this and exposing it to the atmosphere does cause it to age a little bit. It is not very shelf stable unless you use what they call a dry air blanket, which is like a gas, an inert gas you push over the top of it, which I don't have. So when you do this, you want to open the container once, get as much of the product out, and handle all your projects at one time. Plus, it's also handy that if you're like me, you're doing this in a location that is not at your house. This is at my photo studio. I can get all this done and then come back the next morning and have all of them ready to go. I don't have to worry about getting back and forth and driving back and forth to the studio. So here's the part A. Part A is a little bit thicker than the part B here. And note that they are two different colors, and the goal here when we're mixing is to make sure that we end up with one solid purple color. We shouldn't see any pink or any blue when we mix this, and mixing it is really where you want to take your time. Now I have 30 minutes of time to work on this. That's before it starts to set, and once that process starts, there is no going back. So we have 30 minutes at the point that part A and part B go together. So you're going to see me stirring this one too. Very thrilling activity to watch, I'm sure. I'm riveted. I wish I had popcorn right now, because that would be perfect. So anyway, so stirring. And again, trying not to introduce too much air into this product because we don't want to deal with the bubbles. As a fun fact, I'm obviously recording the audio of this after the model was done. The other project I had, one of the small parts did end up with an air bubble on it, and it wrecked it, so I have to actually cast or do that mold again. So The air bubbles are a problem, and I'll probably end up buying a degassing chamber. They're about 120 bucks or so, but this is really the only use I have for it. So as I'm making more and more casts, I might decide this is a good investment. But if you're just careful, I think you have to make a lot of mistakes before you start to justify the cost of buying a degassing unit. So again, making sure that I have the stick in there as well, so that my volumes match. This is a by volume product, so we want each cup to have the same amount of product in it. It is not by weight, which is a little more accurate. You can do by weight or by volume, obviously, because if it's the same, it's 1-to-1. So note, yeah, we do have quite a bit of silicone here. So if you're like, wow, dude, that's a lot, it is a lot, but we are doing more than one project at a time. So I want to get the cap back on that as soon as possible, and note that no action has started because the two have not mixed together yet. Note that I mix mine I don't mix them in the same cup. I use a third vessel and put both A and B into it. Before you pour stuff on it, you want to use a mold release, and you basically, I didn't do this on camera because it's not exactly thrilling. You want to spray the mold release all over the model and the foam core, and that will make the silicone let go later on. When you actually try and pry things out of it, it'll pop right out, and sure enough, it came out very, very easily. All right, so I'm ready to go now, so I just show basically the mixing of the part A and the part B. Very thrilling process, and I could have done this obviously in one cup and not worried about it, but I guess this is the practice I have from working with other resins, that I always like to do my mixing in a third, sometimes even a fourth vessel. Once you start mixing A and B, and if you have enough time, what it's great to do is to pour it out of your mixing vessel into another one, because that way you can see all the sides and the bottom that may have pink and or blue lines still on them, because we need every part of this to mix together. We can't have any pink or any blue left. And so here we go. Once we start, we have 30 minutes, which is obviously a long time for what we need to do, so it's not exactly a rush. Now later, when we actually cast the plastic, that is a 2.5-minute working time, in which case we really need to get it done. And that one's a little bit more hectic. But again, if you have everything laid out and you're ready to go, 2.5 minutes is plenty of time. And I had absolutely no issues getting that poured either, which you'll see. I go through the whole process here. So basically just making sure that I have as much of the product as I can get off of the stick and out of the container into the mixing vessel. And then I use a paint stirrer for this project. I don't use a small wooden stick. I need to really give it some effort. It is a bit thicker, and again, you want to scrape the sides and scrape the bottom as you're going. I like to turn the bowl as well as using the stick on the sides. And I'm just trying to get to a consistent purple color. And a lot of stirring involved here. This is a fun process, by the way, and again, I'm still loving the fact that this whole idea came out of my head. This thing doesn't really exist until I printed it on my printer, and now I'm making duplicates of it. So once again, if you leave a comment down below, I'll pick one at random and I'll send you one of these if you're interested. It'd be kind of cool to help obviously get the channel built. Decided to kind of really focus on using my YouTube more for my photography and hobbies like this rather than just my gaming, which is what I do when I want to relax. So this is a fun project. So if you leave a comment and obviously like the video, that would be quite helpful. Hey, it's an interesting fact, only about 1 out of every 100 viewers actually bothers to click the like button. That's pretty interesting, and I find myself doing the same thing. I'll like videos but not bother to click the button. So after I'm stirring it here, I'm just making sure that I'm happy with it. We need to pour it from high above so that we don't get bubbles in it. This is called the bombs away method, rather than using a degassing chamber. So I usually pour it so the first little bit dribbles next to the model, and then I pour it in, and I want it to be a really thin stream of about 2.5 feet over the top of the table, pouring in a really thin stream, and I want to pour it into the lowest part of the mold, and I basically just leave it right there. So I don't want any air bubbles introduced, and this is the easiest way to get rid of bubbles. And you'll see every so often something that looks like it's thick coming down the stream, and that's one of the bubbles, and it pops when it reaches the bottom. So this turned out very well. I did not have any bubbles at all anywhere around the model. I could have used a smaller cup and not as much thickness in the silicone, but again, This is going to be a pretty durable model mold, so I'll be able to make as many castings from it as I would like. And I make castings out of anything. I can use it for concrete, I can use it for rubber, I can use it for resin, which is what I'm going to do tomorrow. What we're going to cast in today is a plastic. It's a 65 durometer plastic. That's about the same as like the lid on a water bottle, your blue or your white lid that you find in a screw-on water bottle. That's about the same hardness as this, what we're going to be making. Now this is just the mold, obviously. This is just the thing that is going to be receiving whatever plastic, rubber, concrete that we tend to plaster, plaster. Could be dental resin. And there's so many things you can use to make molds out of. But we need to have the mold, and that's what this is doing here. This 30 durometer, that's what the 30 is, means it's very soft. Now, this is the next morning, and you can see here's the mixing cup, and if I pull the stir stick out, you see that it comes out dry. There we go. That's how you know everything worked. So now it's a matter of breaking the cup off, and I tend to just kind of peel away the whatever the mold is, or the dam, I should say, that's holding everything in, and the hot glue gives me a little bit of a problem here, but it's supposed to, right? And if it came right off, then the silicone would weep in underneath it. And we don't care about, obviously, keeping this foam core or the cup or any of this is all garbage. So we're just after that purple blob there. Now you can actually make casts with this silicone as well. It doesn't have to always be a mold. So if you wanted to make something soft, you could. So if you want to use it for costuming or headdresses or things along that lines, you certainly could do so. So then we just pull it off, and then my object should still be there, hopefully glued to the foam core. And sure enough, there it is. Now you can see we get a little bit of silicone that leaked in underneath, so we have a little bit of a flap there. But we really don't care about that. I'm going to cut that off with a knife. But you see, it turned out perfectly. It's an exact duplicate, and the level of detail in there is absolute. I mean, it is everything. If you use a resin or filament 3D printer that has little lines on it, you will see those lines. So oftentimes it's recommended you use sand or somehow treat that. Now I take my big knife here and try and go through and get the big pieces off, but I go back with a razor blade and do a much more detailed job of this over at my workbench. But just to kind of give you the idea, this stuff comes off very easily. You can tear it as well, but I don't want to wreck the mold potentially. Now, when I'm filling this, I am not going to be going all the way to the lip, so this edge really doesn't matter that much. It's just me being anal about trying to make it look as perfect as possible. So I'm not really overly worried about that edge. I mean, I'm a little worried about it. A little bit worried, meaning that I took the time to go ahead and cut it off with a razor blade because I had to stare at it, but not a big deal. Again, I can do this in a smarter way, but I'm trying to do it on camera to show you that you can just take this and straighten it up. What I want to be careful is not to nick the wall there, that wall, or nick the object itself. So there we go. That's my perfect duplicate of my 3D printed object, and now I can fill that with whatever I would like. Concrete or whatever. Again, here's a shot of the mold release I took earlier. We will not use mold release when we pour in our next product. And here's another shot of the silicone that I used, the OOMOO 30 A and B. You don't need to use mold release unless you're pouring silicone into a silicone mold. We're going to be pouring plastic into a silicone mold or resin into a silicone mold. However, we will use some baby powder. And I show that here in a moment after with my amazingly slow motion shot of the OOMOO 30. It's amazing, isn't it? Slow motion. Isn't that sexy? That's some sexy by weight 30-minute pot life. And if you don't get that out of their pot within 30 minutes, boy, your stick will stick there and you'll suddenly be facing a quite hilarious situation. I've never actually had any of the product solidify in the pot before because I know better. I tend to get it out of there right away. This is an inordinately long shot, by the way. I'm really appreciating the artistic merit of my autofocus on the part A and the part B entering the frame. It's elegant. It's a work of art, really. I should probably edit this. Man. All right, so talcum powder with my giant hand in the way. There we go. That's great. Nice shot. And then take a little brush, which you put your hand in the way for as well. so the camera can't see that. And basically just using talcum powder to get it into the crevices. This breaks the surface tension of the resin or the plastic so that it will get in there and not form bubbles against that surface. But we don't want any powder left inside of the mold either. So after I get my giant hand out of the way, then we'll use some air, some compressed air. And I just happen to have this one laying around, which I use for dusting off products. It's just canned air for electronics or whatever. And you just blow the extra powder out of the way. And that's all you need to do. That will make sure that we get nice adhesion of the Smoothcast 65D, which is the one I happen to have laying around and the one I decided to use. This cures white, but it pours clear. And it cures in 2.5 minutes, so we really got to put the spurs to it. Now this one I can shake and not stir, so I went ahead and shook those off camera. It does have a pretty low viscosity, so I really don't have to worry about bubbles. But again, bubbles are a thing that can happen. So then when you're ready, I just pour part A into part B. I don't use an additional cup in this situation because these cups are destroyed. Because the resin is, our plastic is a plastic, it doesn't wash off or rinse out or anything like that. So again, the same product idea here. Stir thoroughly, get it off the sides, get it off the bottom, make sure your stick is clear, do all that kind of stuff. And because it's low viscosity, it's a little easier to obviously make sure I get this mixed up without introducing too many air bubbles into the product. And I need to put it in my mold. Now I don't want to fill it all the way to the top because that edge is a little ragged, and I can fill it as much or as little as I want to, depending on how thin I want this to be. And I was looking for about 1/4 inch or so, which is exactly about how full I filled it. And then I use the rest of the resin off camera for other projects. And then I'd basically just leave the camera on here, and I'm going to speed this up so you can watch it cure in real time. Oh, not in real time, speed it up time. Alright, so I'm just letting this cure, and you can see that it starts in the thickest area and works its way out. It's kind of the way that this works. So the bigger the volume, the faster it will cure in that area. It's exactly backwards of how you think it would work, where you would expect something to cure in the thinner area. So this took about 3 minutes or 4 minutes. I think I let it cure for a total of 15, and then I came back and just take a look at it here. And just, again, push on the mold a little bit and it pops right out. There's nothing to really adhere to silicone other than another silicone. So it came out and it is flawless. Is exactly perfect, smooth, which is not, by the way, how I want this to end. I'm going to rough this up a bit with some spray paint to try and make something a little more textured. But you can finish this however you would like to finish it. This was just my preference. So this turned out obviously flawless. It's just exactly everything I wanted it to be. So here I'm using some Ace Metallic Gold spray paint, which I used on a planchet I made for a Ouija board body paint I did a while ago, and so I just happen to have it around. And I know that it makes kind of a hammered finish. So I'm just going to spray some off to the side here first to make sure the nozzle is clear. That's always a good idea. And then I'm going to go ahead and give it a few coats, let it dry, and then come back and do another coat later on. So obviously I don't record that entire process because it's terribly boring. But when I'm done, I'm going to go through and then take some black acrylic paint and add a wash to it, which is basically you smear the paint on, then you wipe it off right away, and it stays behind to kind of make it look aged. I like that look on things. Again, I did that on the planchet for the Ouija board, and I'm quite pleased with it. So here I go. I'm just going to go ahead and give it a quick spray to, again, not put it on too heavily, but make sure that I have a nice even coating all the way around. And when you spray, you want to make sure you start and stop not on the model. You want to start and stop off to the side, so it's a sweeping, even sweeping motion. Pretty similar to how you use an airbrush, actually. So if you're used to that type of a thing, this is the exact same process. So here we go. And that's more or less how I coated this thing. Again, I did a couple coats on it to see that it got the finish that I was looking for. And again, it could have been smoother, but in the end, this is how it turned out. You see a little bit of hammered finish that the spray paint put into it. But I'm very happy with that. In fact, I'd like a little more roughed up, so I'll probably buff it a bit and then rinse, put some of that black wash into the crevices there and wipe it down. I want it to look a little aged, but maybe not too much. But again, I'm going to give one of these away. So if somebody leaves a comment down below, and I'll probably go through the end of November or so, 2018, and then I'll pick from those comments, and I'll send you one in the mail, and you can wear it proudly or do something with it or whatever you would like. You can. I'll send you a resin one, by the way, not one of these 65Ds. I'll send you one of the 300 that I'm going to make tomorrow, and you can actually screw into that. So if you want to put a fastener or some other type of way to attach this to something, a pin or what have you, then you can do so without a problem. Well, that pretty much concludes my video on how to make a mold, and then how to make a cast from that mold from a 3D printed object. So from my mind to the table, I'm really quite happy with the product and how it turned out. And again, this is just part one of a multi-part series. We're going to do a body paint for Captain Marvel, and there's the finished product. That is what I ended up with. A little bit of hammer finish from the spray paint, which is what I was after. Something that looked more metal and not something that looked plastic. But that's just the Gold Ace spray paint there, and a little bit of roughing up. As I say, I am going to buff it a bit and add a little bit more age to it. But in the long run, that's how it worked, and I could not be happier with it. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'm happy to help. I'll probably be making more casts in the future of products or projects as I go on, because it's fun to do, and the printer is great. Very nice 3D printer that is not a filament based one, because I really don't, I mean, you can print much larger things, but I'm really not overly pleased with the look of the filament printer. In my opinion, too much sanding is required before you can actually make a cast from it. So this was a great project, and really nice stretch of my skills. I mean, I've cast things before, but not going into it with something that came out of my head. Usually it's something you already have and you want to make a duplicate of it. This was really cool, because it doesn't exist anywhere. This is the only one like it in the world, because it's mine. So it came out of my head, and there it is. So once again, thank you for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, leave them below, and I'll take a random comment and I'll send you a resin version of this. It'll be a 300 durometer that you can do with whatever you would like. So I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.